Welcome to our Global Voice in Transition series, where we'll be exploring key research findings from AVOXI and Metrigy's annual State of International Voice for the Contact Center report. Each session draws on insights from IT and CX leaders across 10 countries and 16 industries. We'll explore the trends and challenges that are shaping enterprise voice strategies. I'm Michelle Grenz, Senior Product Marketing Manager at AVOXI, and I'll be moderating our discussion today. Before we get started, let me briefly introduce our expert speakers and their companies. First, we have Barbara Dondiego, our CEO here at AVOXI. Joining Barbara, we have Robin Gareiss, CEO and Principal Analyst for Metrigy. Barbara brings over 25 years of experience in global communications. Under her leadership over the past 9 years, AVOXI has transformed from an international systems integrator to a global enterprise software platform. She has previously held leadership roles at Fairpoint, Earthlink, and Level 3. Robin has more than 25 years of experience in advising senior IT executives on how they can transform their businesses. She is also a widely recognized expert with a focus on communications, contact center, and AI. She is a regular speaker at communications events and writes a blog for No Jitter. Robin, Barbara, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Glad to be here.
Now, a little bit about AVOXI and Metrigy. AVOXI delivers next-generation cloud voice solutions for global businesses. Our software gives companies automation, visibility, and intelligence to manage mission-critical voice communications worldwide. With unmatched service and virtual numbers in 150-plus countries, we serve more than 5,000 enterprises using voice to better serve their customers. Metrigy is a research and advisory firm that helps companies navigate change in workplace collaboration, customer and employee experience, and digital transformation. Backed by in-depth research and analysis, Metrigy provides practical insights and guidance that technology providers and enterprise leaders can use to make smarter decisions and drive results. All right, let's dive in. As I mentioned, today's discussion will cover data and insights from AVOXI's recent State of International Voice for the Contact Center report, developed in collaboration with Metrigy. The research surveyed 365 voice and telecom decision makers on topics, trends, and challenges in the world of international voice. Some issues are consistently at the top of the list for every IT and contact center leader. In today's session, we're going to discuss some of the persistent challenges we're seeing in international voice year over year. Topics like call quality, coverage, navigating complex international voice regulations, and managing too many providers. These are the area where enterprises are still feeling the most pain and where decisions about providers and strategy can make the biggest difference. A key theme from the research is just how central security and fraud prevention have become in global voice. Nearly 80% of enterprises rate these issues as significant or highly significant challenges. And it's not just about technical risk. Breaches or fraud in the voice channel can lead to both financial loss and serious reputational damage. In fact, security is a defining factor in choosing and evaluating providers. Barbara, I want to ask, why do you think security and fraud prevention are such persistent challenges in global voice, even for large enterprises?
Well, gosh, I think the net of that answer is because the people doing the fraud keep evolving with the technology just like everyone else is. So, as technology evolves and as we have things like the advent of AI, that's great for contact centers and that's great for our overall industry. But then the folks that are, I will call them bad actors, are also using those same types of technologies to find new and different ways to try to, commit fraud and take away waste the time of contact center agents and contact center teams. So I think that's one main thing. The other one is as folks are really evolving everything into the cloud, every aspect of your architecture has to kind of keep evolving with it. And so security and fraud prevention, where it used to be very sort of hardware-based, particularly security was a very hardware-based industry, is now moving to a cloud-based industry. And that's relatively new for IT teams and CX technologists to understand how to really tune that and work with that and keep evolving those systems as more and more different types of threats are out there.
Great, good stuff. Robin, what kinds of fraud or breaches are the most concerning for enterprises operating internationally?
There are so many. It would take me a while to go through all of them. I can highlight a few. I would like to first say, though, that, we just released a whole, independent study looking at customer experience optimization. And I will tell you the number one foundational project for like a foundational CX transformation project is basically what we're looking at. The number one project was improving CX security strategy. So this is a big issue. This isn't something that is just kind of like, oh yeah, checkbox item. It's something that they're actively transforming. And actually another item on that list, it's a long list. Number 4 was moving security functions to service provider networks, not having them internal anymore. Not putting together like this patchwork solution to address security solutions, but like going to a trusted partner, especially in the carrier network, in the service provider network, because now that stays out of you. It's just out of your company, and the service provider is responsible for detecting that, right? But there's so many of them. I mean, robocalls, auto dialers that they like deliver recorded messages, and that can open the door to some financial fraud. Certainly all sorts of call fraud and toll fraud, that type of thing. Just any method to gather or generate revenue through fraudulently collecting toll-free revenue. Like that's another one. Hacked PBXs, just weak security passwords, giving fraudsters access to like a PBX and making calls and never having to pay the bill. There's spoofing, there's social engineering, there's DDoS and TDOS. There's unregistered agents. This is a big thing with home offices and remote offices where unregistered agents can use like a desktop or apps of a legitimate agent to steal things like credit card numbers or hack into customer accounts. So there are so many things. And like Barbara was saying, I mean, these bad actors just keep getting more and more evil, I'll say. I'm not going to say better. They just keep getting more and more evil.
More sophisticated, right? Along with everything else.
They're coming up with new and different ways and always trying to stay ahead of, how we can fix this stuff. So it is definitely an issue that keeps getting bigger and broader. And as more and more technology comes into place and the technology becomes more complex, I think it becomes, there's more entry points for them to come in.
I will say one more thing, Michelle, is that sort of the rise of voice that we're seeing with the rise of AI use cases in the contact center also puts a spotlight on security, because really, truly, voice has been a largely unsecure channel. And so you sort of got around that by the fact that you had a human answering the phone, and they had a certain, I'll say tribal knowledge on how to deal with fraud and with security. And now if you have a machine answering the phone, that's a whole different schematic. I think we've all seen some of those. I know there was maybe this was a news article about, certain types of AI IVRs trying to answer the phone for like a pizza parlor, and people were ordering like, 300 waters into the order machine. If you were a human, you wouldn't take that order. But if you're a machine, you're like, well, there's no parameter telling me not to do that, which is kind of like a different kind of fraud. And too, because it's wasting your time, it's wasting your order process. So I think that that's the other piece of that is as we start to put AI into the system, as voice starts to become more and more prominent, always was very prominent, but even more so now, then that's really a channel that needs to be shored up with technology.
So true.
Yeah. Thank you both on that one. Well, we also know that security and fraud prevention aren't the only key challenges for enterprise voice. Two more of the most consistent challenges are coverage and call quality. And so more than 3/4 of enterprises rated both of these as highly significant. For customer-facing operations, poor quality means frustrated customers and potential revenue loss. And without sufficient geographic coverage, enterprises struggle to scale consistently and support operations across all their markets. So Robin, I'll start with you. Why do you think coverage and quality remain such a universal pain point, even as technology improves?
Yeah, I want to first kind of back that up. Like in that same study I was just talking about, the number 3 foundational project, and this was cited by nearly 50% of companies, is just to be able to address the performance of the network, the video, and the audio. Or, I'm sorry, the network, video, and audio. And that's a really big issue, particularly for international voice and video traffic. So, like, if you're a company operating in one country, and particularly, like, let's say you're in the U.S., you're operating in the U.S. This isn't quite as big of an issue for you, and you don't understand, like, why are people still talking about call quality, until you start expanding globally, and then you understand. It's so interesting, as I speak at like a lot of customer advisory board meetings, and you would think when you're in these advisory board meetings, everything will be focused on, future, like what's going on with AI, what are some of the cool innovative things we can do. I will tell you, like, usually the first 15 to 20 minutes of an hour-long meeting is, why isn't my call quality the way it should be? And this is like for a lot of the CCAS providers, like what's going on with my call quality? Why isn't it as good as it should be? So it is still a really big issue. And I think the whys of this, why does this matter? Well, voice is by far the preferred channel for consumers when they interact with businesses. We do research on this all the time, and we ask them what their preferred way of communicating is, and it's voice. So if that call quality is poor, you will absolutely see that companies are going to lose sales. I'm not going to stay on the phone with someone if everything's choppy and I'm not hearing. I'll either hang up and call somebody else, or just forget my purchase. Right? You're going to receive lower CSAT scores because the company, the customer is not happy with their interaction, and that affects revenue, because then if you're like we all do, we look at ratings, we look at publicly available ratings, and we want to see how a company rates. If somebody's saying, oh, this call was terrible, I couldn't hear anything, it's going to make you look at someone else. And I also think it just takes longer to resolve issues with customers if you're having quality issues. And then even with like internal calls or interactions with business partners, you can see a lot of frustration emerging and a lot of trust eroding. And then ultimately everyone's productivity suffers. So I think that call quality is a big issue, and obviously coverage. I mean, especially as everyone's growing internationally right now, and you have to, make sure that you've got the coverage there to be able to support the customers who are going to be calling. So I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer. Why coverage is so important. If you don't have it, you can't obviously operate in that region.
Yeah, you can't serve your markets.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Barbara, considering the data and everything that Robin has just shared with us, what do you think companies should be looking for in a provider to ensure that they get both that global reach and that reliable call quality that they need?
Sure. So just to echo what Robin said, I tell folks all the time, you can have the best technology, the best coaching, the best script, the best product, but if the person on the other end of the line can't hear you, you have a problem. Like you can't, you're dead in the water there. So the call quality is so important. And to echo Robin's point about if you're in one country, whether it's the US, any country, just one country, it's really not going to be that challenging for you to operate in the cloud with call quality. But what happens is when you start mixing the countries together, you're literally mixing disparate implementations of SIP technology around the world. And that technology, which really puts voice into the cloud, that means that, someone in France could have a little bit of a different interpretation of the SIP standard in the way they set their network up. And then someone in Africa could have a little different interpretation. Someone in China could have a different interpretation. And because of that is what causes some of these quality issues. And some of then what we do here at AVOXI is we actually engineer those voice streams. So we engineer the voice streams purposefully in our platform so that you can have the highest possible quality. And that's one thing you should really expect from a platform, that it will do that. You can't just say, oh, well, I have to hand off the call to XYZ local network in Kenya, and so therefore it's not my problem. Well, it is your problem if you're going to be providing that service. So we engineer those network streams to work well together and to provide a consistent output for our clients to be able to pick up the phone and have a great conversation. And then the second thing about that is you really need to have global coverage on a fast and high quality infrastructure. And you can measure that. You can ask for stats about that. Your platform should be able to provide that to you. We can easily provide that at AVOXI, not just at a network and global level, but also at a per phone call level. And so that's another thing you should really expect, that you should have that transparency and visibility on what the quality looks like call by call. Our platform also provides that. On the coverage side, the coverage is very interesting. I was talking to a customer a few months ago, and they were still using basically US toll-free numbers to try to operate internationally. And those just don't really work for a few reasons. Number one, different number types are actually getting blocked. If they're not the local number types, they're getting blocked around the world. So it's hard for your customer to reach you and hard to reach your client. So you really have to go with the local number type, as local as possible, whether that's a local sort of in-city in region, in like country number type, or of something called an international toll-free service. That's going to be really important for you to have the best coverage. And then the second thing is really being able to connect to as many places as possible, because everybody wants a number. They don't want to have, number one, if someone calls you from a phone number that doesn't look like it belongs in your country, you're not going to answer it. Your likelihood of answering that is very low. If it even reaches you at all, because it might also not reach you if you don't have like an international plan or a certain kind of accessibility or whatever. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, you're not going to want to place a call out to your vendor, to your whoever you're buying a service from, a good or service from. You're not going to want to place a call to them to ask a question if the number is not familiar to you and you don't even know how to dial it on your phone. So those two things really cause the sort of baseline need to have really great localized coverage.
Great. All right, let's shift to a different topic. One of the strongest themes we saw in this year's research was vendor consolidation. And nearly every company we surveyed, about 96%, is still using multiple providers, and more than 2/3 of those are managing 6 or more. That creates a lot of complexity, and it seems the majority, or about 97%, are either actively consolidating or considering it. So while cost certainly plays a role, what stood out is that the main drivers are call quality and support. Enterprises are looking for fewer providers they can rely on rather than patching together many different vendors. So Barbara, can you talk about why enterprises still end up with so many providers despite this push towards simplification? And from your experience, is it more about lowering costs, or is it more about getting that performance and support?
Right. I mean, I think I feel like that our clients end up with a lot of vendors because these systems have been put together over years. So for example, you might say, if you're a business, you might say, okay, I'm going to have a presence in Singapore. Now I'm going to expand to Vietnam. Now I'm going to add China. Now I'm going to add Japan. And as you add each one of those markets, it depends on what your strategy was at the time to procure services for folks to interact with your call center. So you might have just gone piece by piece. I'm going to go get utilities in China. I'm going to go get something in Japan. You might have gone with a specific regional provider, and then maybe somebody else was in charge of Europe when you went to do your European expansion, and they had a different strategy. And so a lot of times those patchworks are made just because they're done. Maybe all those systems were created over a 20-year period. And so you end up with all these different vendors and all these different phone numbers. So that's how we see it start a lot of times. Now, just like we were talking about the voice stream engineering and SIP not exactly working the explicit same way country to country, you're going to have that same issue if you're trying to tie this together by yourself as an enterprise. So having a platform that really links all that together for you is one way that you're going to have the most stability and the highest quality possible as you migrate everything to the cloud. So I feel like that's why it's a big challenge, and that's why call quality is one of the drivers for consolidation, because it's really hard to make all of that work on your own without engineering it, and it's also really hard to then maintain all of those connections. If you have 10 different providers around the world, they might be giving you invoices in 10 different languages, 10 different currencies. You have 10 different support processes that your team has to understand. You may or may not even operate a 24/7 team. Most people don't. They operate kind of core business hours, Monday through Friday. All that makes it very difficult for you to really operate this system without a platform like an AVOXI platform to help you out.
Thanks, Barbara. Robin, on the same topic, when you look at global enterprises, is there such a thing as a right number of providers? Like, do you think moving to fewer providers increases risk if one provider has an outage, as an example, or does it ultimately make things more resilient?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of that depends. It's going to increase risk if the provider or the providers that you're choosing don't have a robust, redundant, resilient network, right? So I think that's something you really have to talk to your providers about when you're selecting them. Like, what is their redundancy strategy? How are they going to, hedge against any sort of outage or things like that? I don't know that there's I can point to a number, but I would say it's definitely less than 5. And the reason for that is I think that you can engineer redundancy with few providers. Like, I don't think you need a lot of providers to have redundancy. I think Barbara explained a lot of this as well. I mean, it's just like you can do this with a small number of providers. It just takes a little bit of time to set things up the right way. But I think you end up saving a lot of overhead in the long run, because now you don't have the costs associated with managing multiple providers and the headaches associated with managing multiple providers. And I think there's some benefits then that you can get as well. Like to me, I think it's best to have most things with one provider, and then you backfill in certain areas where you need somebody else for whatever reason, whether it's coverage, whether it has something to do with the redundancy that you can't get for some reason with that provider. But I think it's good to have like one primary, and then you might have to have a few backfills, and then regardless, always be proactively monitoring and managing everything to make sure obviously the performance, the call quality, the coverage, everything, integrations are all working properly. But think about that too. When you move, as we're moving forward, the number of integrations that we're seeing with companies as technology, right? It continues to grow. You want all these integrations to have to have to deal with multiple providers in that regard too. So it goes, all of our research is looking in this direction right now, where companies are really trying to consolidate versus best of breed. I know it came out in this research that we did here, but every other study we've been doing in this past year has been showing that people are just like tired of the patchwork approach, and they really want to consolidate as much as they can. I mean, I think the nirvana is, oh boy, one provider could do everything. That's not always going to happen, and we all recognize that, and sometimes it doesn't, just because of merger and acquisition and all that. But I think just being able to have like that one primary is pretty key. But selecting that one primary, you really have to drill down into what can they do, what can't they do.
Well, and on that same vein, Barbara, as these leaders evaluate which providers to keep, what in your mind are the criteria that should matter most in narrowing down their choices?
Yeah, we actually sometimes we offer this as a little service where we'll help you. We'll say, hey, if you're going to do an RFP, that's great. Here's what we would suggest you ask people about. Here's a
that's great.
You can add to it. You can do, but here's what we see as key parameters. But it's sort of the basic things. But a lot of times, I think platforms aren't asked. Like, for example, you should have things you should be able to place an order automatically. You should be able to track that into a system. You should have visibility of all of your calls. You should be able to easily, like within minutes, integrate into your current technologies and also your new technologies. So you have that's like, safeguard as you start to change up your tech stack. And you should be able to have 24/7 support that's live, but you also should be able to have machine-based or software-based support as well, so that things are being monitored behind the scenes without you having to watch those. So those are some key parameters. I think, having things like SLAs around the platform and the services is also something that we recommend clients take a look at when they're selecting a provider. But at the end of the day, you really should expect to have a platform that you're provided that you can log into, and you can really interact with these services, these voice services, just like you would log in and interact with any of your other business applications. And that's probably the key thing. It doesn't have to be like a manual, old school paper telco world. It really needs to be a modern software platform that you're getting, and you should be able to, know how to use that intuitively, and it should be easy to use, just like any other software tool that you pick up now.
I think that the new products, new technologies that you're putting in, like having that quick, implementation, that is so important these days.
Right.
So much more than it has been in the past.
Test your integration, being able to do a drag and drop flow of your call flow, being able to easily see that. All those pieces are really critical. And it shouldn't be like a bespoke service that's going to take like 4 or 6 weeks to put an integration in for you. It should be something that is automated.
Yeah, plug and play.
Right.
Okay, the last major theme we're going to talk about today is regulatory compliance. Managing compliance for international voice is complex, resource intensive, and there's no real single standout approach, according to this research. Most organizations take a blended path, whether it's working with legal firms, managing some responsibilities internally, outsourcing to experts, or relying on their providers for guidance. And despite these efforts, the challenges persist. Nearly 6 in 10 organizations struggle to keep up with constant changes in telecom regulations. More than half say it's difficult to determine which rules apply to them in different markets, and many also find it challenging to stay compliant once those rules are identified. This highlights the growing importance of providers who bring not just global reach, but also localized regulatory expertise and proactive guidance. Robin, I'll turn it over to you. Why do you think compliance has become such a resource-intensive challenge for enterprises operating internationally?
Yeah, but there's quite a few reasons there. I mean, I think primarily technology itself is becoming more and more complex, especially with the addition of AI to everything we do. So as you think about AI, there's all kinds of discussions going on in standards bodies and government agencies. Like, what do we do with this? How do we make sure we keep people safe? How do we make sure we keep data private? So as a result, you see regulations increasing. For example, in one of the studies we did earlier this year, 40% of companies said they're finding challenges just to be able to use sentiment analysis in Europe because of some of the data privacy regulations. So what do you do then? You can use it in some parts of the world and not in other parts of the world. So it just becomes really, really complex. And I think that's just going to keep going because every country is going to kind of do what makes sense for them, right? And so there's going to be just different regulations in different areas where you operate. So obviously you don't want to not grow and expand globally because of technology, but you have to make sure you're not getting regulatory fines. So I just think it's just a lot to keep up with as technologies expand. And I think then if you are, let's just say you are even keeping up with newly passed or changed regulations in, maybe the dozens or even hundreds of companies that you're working in, you then don't know whether those apply to you. Wait, is this just for healthcare? Does this also apply to financial services? And so therefore, you're also going to need legal consultation. And with the legal consultation, even then, you may need a team of lawyers who have expertise in different countries. So it gets very, very expensive, especially if you do the DIY approach. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really tricky. I mean, I'll say one comment is that anything where you have to have lawyers who have to explain what the regulation might be or what the compliance might be, that means there's a total lack of clarity. And there's a lot of gray, because the lawyers are making a call on what they believe their interpretation is based on case law, rulings, reading of the law, the intent was, all these other factors. And they're not 100% right either. So that's where I think compliance is just very tricky field overall, because it's like law. It's like general law. If law was straightforward, we wouldn't have lawyers in courts. We would just be able to go to like some kiosk and be like, yep, this is right, this is wrong. It would just be like spit out. It's not like that. And so it's really an interpretation of what these truly mean and what scenarios, and someone's statement may or may not be written for the exact use case that you have. So that adds complexity. And then you sort of make an assumption that the laws and the compliance is going to be similar to your home country, and it may in fact be very different from your home country.
That's so true. Well, Barbara, based on what you've seen, which regulatory challenges tend to surprise organizations the most when they expand into new markets?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll just start with my previous statement. Is I think a lot of what surprises folks is if it's different from how they believe the world to be. So if you can do, say, in the voice channel, if you can do, you can call people at 10 o'clock at night in certain countries, maybe that's fine for marketing calls. But in China, that's against the law to call after 8 p.m. Yeah. So that might surprise folks, because they might assume that there's a different parameter. Certain what we call KYC, know your customer information, is really strict and specific in some countries, and it's very different in other countries. There's certain use cases that are allowed in certain countries and not allowed in other countries, like sell foreign exchange service platforms, which is kind of a schemy thing that's done around the world. Gambling platforms are illegal and illegal in certain parts of the country. So I really think just having a difference is what surprises people the most about it. But I'll say that one thing to help companies is that the more documentation that's really codified in your platform about what your use case is, and the more that those use cases are filed with regulators in country. That's what we do at AVOXI. That actually provides the most stability for any voice use case. So inbound use cases that are certified have the right contacts, have the right information, are sent to the right organizations, and are very transparent, those are highly stable. And same thing with outbound use cases, where you have things like you have the script, you certify that it's a known caller use case, you're not using things like auto dialers, which are illegal in many countries. That's going to give you the most stability.
Mm-hmm. Well, another question for you, Barbara. How can providers play a bigger role in reducing risk for their customers beyond just, offering the numbers themselves?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, first of all, the provider itself, if you're providing services, voice services around the world, you are responsible for those voice services. And you will not provide stability for your customer if you're not doing that in a compliant way. So that's number one, is making sure that you're providing that correctly. And number two is really codify all that information in a platform so that it's current, it's available, it's up to date. I mean, we get requests all the time at AVOXI from regulatory agencies all over the world that says, can you resubmit all the paperwork for these 100 numbers in this country? Because we're doing an investigation, and because we have it, because it's in our platform, because it's easy for us to get, it just goes to the regulator. Now we've already sent it before, right? It just re-goes, but maybe they're not good with paperwork, maybe they lost it, I don't know. Goes back to the regulator, they check it off, fine, we move on. But we're able to do that in a very smooth and quick way, so that that helps protect a lot of our clients.
Great. Well, I have one last question for both of you. Robin, maybe you can start for us. Looking ahead, do you expect compliance complexity to get better with global standardization, or do you think it's going to get worse as more countries introduce new requirements and there's a lack of standardization?
Yeah, I mean, I think we always see the nirvana of global standardization. Everyone's going to be the same. I don't see a lot of global standardization happening, to be honest. I mean, I see a desire for it. And, we may see more, like higher level, easy issues that companies would typically self-impose anyway, becoming like global standards. But I truly do believe that every country is going to operate in a manner that's really best for their interests. So, I think the complexity of compliance is just going to keep getting more and more complex. I think it's just going to keep getting worse, I guess you would say. AI is just going to drive that even more so, because there's so many countries have different perspectives, I mean, on AI and what you can do. But even beyond AI, Barbara pointed out a bunch of areas where, okay, this is illegal in one country, it's not in another. And that's just going to that's not going to ever standardize globally. So I just think it's going to keep getting more and more complex, and you're going to really have to do whatever you can to sort of hedge that in. And maybe AI, frankly, could become something that makes this less complex. Can I use AI in a reliable way that tells me when I need to be concerned about something and when I can't be? Or maybe that is embedded into a platform. Barbara,
Exactly.
Could that
That's
be something?
exactly right. Yeah, if I sort of think about it, one thing we try to do here with our platform at AVOXI is we operate in the international voice world, 150 countries, 7 different number types, lots and lots of different rules and regulations and parameters and use cases and coverage on all those different variables. So if you kind of just take the concept of that, what we try to do for customers is say, that's a lot of data that we have codified in our platform, but we're going to sort of simplify it for you in what you really need to focus on and what we're going to show you for exactly what you're trying to do. And it's kind of, to me, it's kind of the same thing with all these different regulations. And we do have a lot of that codified already, but as it continues to evolve, I would say that you're not going to be able to manually do it. You're going to have to leverage a platform and a database that does that for you, and you can roll AI over it. Those are some things we're actually working on within our platform, is having sort of a regulatory front end that says, here's what we're trying to do. Does this work? Enter your information one time. Okay, this will work across this use case will work across these specific countries. That's very, very near. But I think trying to manage all of this yourself in paper or in a notebook or in a different spreadsheet is not going to work for you. You have to have it codified in a platform, leveraging a team of experts behind that. So I think that's the thing. I actually have a little optimistic view. I mean, I think as you start to get more information, documented, and you're able to use technology to control that and manage it. And I also think as you're starting to look at, on the outbound side, things like global branded caller ID, which is truly a certified call that says we are running through several different steps to certify that this is XYZ hotel company calling you about your reservation. As we start to get some of those things happening in the bigger system, that should actually help our clients be more compliant and understand the regulations that they need to adhere to better.
I think they're leveraging almost like leveraging buying powers, because if you're doing this in the platform once, everyone can kind of take advantage of that. That's than me as a company paying a team of lawyers a fortune to manage this just for me. But I mean, that's a real, I think you raise a really good point, because it's not, I don't necessarily trust the governments to ever come to any sort of agreement on regulations. But your point is like, hey, we can use technology to help make this easier.
To present it, right, to present it. And we have some conversations with customers now where we say, here's our interpretation of the regulation. And they'll say, okay, great, we agree with 90% of that. Here's the 10% where we have a different interpretation. And then we'll say, well, can we adjust something that we're doing so we're together on it? That also is for really large companies, that's also another path too. But I think starting with something that's not zero is really important.
All right, great. As we wrap up today's session, considering all the topics we've covered, let's talk about the strategic implications. And we've sort of covered this in the discussion, but we can kind of sum it up here. What these results mean for organizations making decisions about their voice providers and their compliance strategy. Robin, maybe you can share your sort of final thoughts around like vendor model selection and vendor criteria.
Yeah, for sure. I would say that one clear theme that we're seeing both here and in our research more broadly is vendor consolidation, not only with global voice services, but in general. I think as technology becomes just more pervasive and more complex, I don't think most companies will achieve or have achieved the use of a single provider, for any given technology area, but we can get pretty close. Like I said, I just think most companies would like to have that primary, and then the ability to use APIs or pre-built integrations to add in where they need to. What we're seeing is almost all enterprises that we look at are still working with multiple providers, but they're in the process of trying to shrink that down. I would say in our research in the CX world right now, 60% of companies are saying that they are foregoing best of breed to achieve an integrated solution. So there's benefit to doing best of breed, of course. Pick this one and this one, the best in every area, and stitch them all together. That was a thing for a while, but now that's kind of going away, and people are foregoing the benefits of that because they want the integration. And when companies do integrate, let's say unified communications and contact center, two big platforms, when they do integrate that, 76% use a single provider for that. They want the benefit of that platform integration. So I just think the issue is selecting the right provider. I think doing so definitely reduces complexity. It improves service quality. It improves support. One important point to evaluate beyond just the raw cost is the value. So look at what's the bang for your buck. Maybe you're spending more on a particular provider, but are you getting the good value for that? And some companies are really good at measuring that and others are not. I do think it's important in this world, in the global voice world, you've got to have a company that brings that strong global coverage. I mean, otherwise, why use them, right? Good software management capabilities, kind of like Barbara was saying earlier, just being able to have your kind of your dashboard. You can go in there and look at everything. Security compliance, hugely important, like we talked about. And I would say a lot of good expertise in the voice infrastructure itself, the troubleshooting. So that type of thing, I would say. Yeah.
Thanks, Robin. Barbara, maybe you can share your final thoughts around compliance and risk management.
Yeah, I mean, I think compliance and risk management will continue to be there in more and different and increasingly complex ways. But I think, there's a lot of interesting technology solutions that are coming down the line with platforms like AVOXI that can help you. And I just think that's what customers should demand, someone that's going to help them with that in a way that's automated and modern and makes their lives easier.
Great. All right. Well, it sounds like to me When we put all these pieces together, we have a clear takeaway that is choose partners that help you simplify operations, but also help you stay compliant, help you prepare for the future. And then you get that good winning combination that delivers the high quality, resilient voice that you need. That is our time for today. So as we close out, I just want to say these hurdles may not be going anywhere anytime soon. However, they are shaping the strategies and the provider choices that are going to define the future of global voice, and it will ultimately determine who gets voice right. I'd like to thank our speakers, Robin and Barbara, and thank you to our listeners for your time today. Feel free to reach out to us with any questions or for more information about the research. And don't forget to check out the other videos in the series where we explore data around topics including CCAS and UCAS provider choices and AI for global voice. See you next time.